humor portion of the show here, and we'll move on to what you really came here, which is my good friend and respected colleague, Urko Woods. So I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Neil, and hello, everybody. It's nice to see so many people here, familiar faces, friends. I was going to say my mother in the back, but now you know she's not in the back. So, I am delighted to be here and to have an opportunity to talk to you about pivoting innovation, finding new ways to drive growth. I wanted to ask a few questions, just to get a sense of your familiarity with the three things, maybe more, that I'm going to be talking about. So quick survey. How many of you are familiar with the lean startup process? Okay, how about the design thinking process? Hands up nice and high, please. How about the jobs to be done process? Any other innovation processes that people practice? Fenway, Scientology, what is it?
Praying to a higher power.
Yeah, right. Okay, good. Well, I work with a company called Strategy that's one of the pioneers in the jobs to be done. I like to call it the tasks to be done for various reasons. There's lean startup and design thinking, and what I'm going to try to do is integrate some of the best elements of those to pivot innovation for dramatically better results. That's what I think we can do here today. So, the objectives, can everybody see so far? Is that okay? And here, well? Neil, I see you making some.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm just counting people, that's all.
Okay. So I want to define innovation. I think having a clear description, at least that we can all agree we're talking about, is important. Define what is holding back lean startup and design thinking. Then demonstrate how we can pivot to dramatically improve success rates, create brand message and a positioning that really connects, and create a tight fit between what customers want and what companies actually deliver. That's a pretty good definition of innovation right there, of success. Creating a tight fit between what customers want and what is actually being delivered, and gain a much higher return on investment. And then we'll have about 10 minutes of Q&A. Please feel free to stop for clarification. I do have quite a few slides, so I'm going to go fairly quickly, but please feel free. I think it's important to get the concepts grounded before I move on. So, first, why is it important for us to talk about this? You probably have your own reasons for being here, but why is more success with startups and innovation important? Well, one thing that is, I think, very stunning is this study that Strategy, and it's now a PwC company, used to be part of Booz. They've done 11 years in a row a study of the top 1,000 R&D spenders in the world. And they have found, after 10,000 analyses, that there's no statistical relationship between R&D spend and sales growth, gross profit growth, operating profit growth, operating margin, net profit growth, net margin, market cap growth, or total shareholder return. I find that pretty stunning. I suspect you do as well. Something's clearly broken if there is no discernible result from all of this investment. The US alone is spending about $320 billion a year, and to not see more impact, something's clearly wrong. This is a good book if you're not familiar with it. Any budding entrepreneurs, I recommend this one, Nail and Scale It by Furr and Ahlstrom. And the number one risk for innovators is this risk of missing the market. And their statistic they put in is over 90% of businesses fail because they could not get anyone to buy the product, not because they couldn't build it. So clearly there's a problem with understanding customer needs. And this is actually the cover of just the last May issue. And it's how to really learn from failure. And I understand there's a place for that, but I found that I read the article, I was a little disappointed because it seemed to be all about how to learn from failure instead of doing some pretty simple things that I'm going to talk about today to dramatically improve success. To me, it's sort of like, who would you want your kid to be on a sports team with? A coach that said, hey, we're going to really learn about the failure, the inevitable failures. Let's really get the most learning we can out of it. Or do you want that kid to be on a team where the coach is all about winning? What I'm going to show you today is to help dramatically increase the wins for entrepreneurs and innovators. Starting to sound a little bit like Donald Trump here, aren't I? So here's the definition that we use in our company for innovation. It's a process of identifying unmet customer needs and then developing solutions that address them. I like this definition because it is descriptive and it gives me an opportunity to bring out 3 key parts. It's a process, not an epiphany. It's not sitting around and hoping to have some creative thoughts. We'll talk about the difference between creativity and innovation in a minute. It starts with uncovering, if you want predictable innovation, that's what we're trying to get to here, it must start with the needs first and then go to solutions. So those are the 3 key things. It's a process, not an epiphany. It starts with customer needs, and then using them, we can focus our creativity to create something of value. So I think even if you look at a lot of different definitions, you can find them on the internet, you will find they're basically 2 parts that pretty much every definition is alluding to in one way or another. There's what I call the customer space, that's identifying an unmet need. That's our role as innovators, as startup entrepreneurs. And there's the solution space. It's our job to satisfy the unmet need with something new. But the question is, where should we start? A lot of companies are starting with prototyping, with like lean startup in particular. But the problem is that starting with that will never deliver the kind of predictable innovation that we want because it's really a guessing game. So let's talk about lean startup. Now I want to say right offhand that they've done a lot. They've brought a lot of energy. They've allowed companies to collaborate, that is suppliers to collaborate with customers, to co-create in ways that were not being done. They've definitely accelerated the learning cycle. They're doing a lot of good things. So I don't want to be negative. I really respect what they're doing. I went out to their annual conference in November and learned a lot myself. And I still think there's an opportunity to improve it. And I think one of the great things about Eric, one reason that Eric Rees, the founder, has been so phenomenally effective in spreading the gospel of lean startup, if you will, around the world. There are people from all kinds of companies from all over the world in San Francisco in November, is his very invitational position, if you will, on it. He says, look, it's not mine. Do what you need to do to make it right for you. So it's in that spirit I want to offer a pivot, a change of direction to the process so that we can improve it. So these are the 3 key elements. And he writes this on the website. The fundamental activity of a startup is to turn ideas into products. That's the build. So the 3 things: build, measure, learn. Measure how customers respond, and then to learn whether to pivot, change direction, or persevere, enhance, refine what you're doing. And all successful startup processes should be geared to accelerate that feedback loop. That's his point of view. There's a lot to that. Here, if you build it out a little further, you can see the build, measure, learn really starts with ideas. And based on a hunch, based on some insight, build a prototype they call a minimum viable product, an MVP, and launch that to get an idea from the customer how well you've addressed their needs. So I really like that he's very clear that we often are wrong in our assumptions, and that's why we need to launch these MVPs to get customer feedback. And that's how we learn. And the idea, well, okay, I'm going to come back to that. Let me say a little more about this. The minimum viable product. A good way to think of this is you want it to be as little effort and money and development time to get the results in learning. So with manufacturing, if you're an established manufacturing company, the idea is to produce high quality products. That's success. With lean startup, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for learning, what Eric calls validated learning. And I think that's a great objective. It's not about producing the thing for people. His idea is let's make it a minimally viable product so people can say, yeah, I like that, and then you can engage them in collaboration and co-creation. So coming back to this, I just wanted to also emphasize the validated learning. You go through this, and the idea is to minimize the total time through the loop. So one of Eric's key insights is that it's not about getting 6 months of startup capital and have a runway of 6 months with 3 employees or whatever is traditional. It's how many times can you learn and go through this loop. So you want to launch that MVP and learn as much as you can, as quickly as you can, and reiterate. Sounds pretty good. And yet, the failure rate is still very high. He said this to us at the conference. Now that's pretty high. You're probably aware that's about where a lot of people say failure rates are. I've heard 75%, over 90%. And some people will respond to this and say, well, it doesn't matter because people are going through that learning loop and they're getting to success much faster. So actually there are more entrepreneurs being developed. And maybe that's true. But it's kind of a moot point from my perspective for today. What if you could reduce that failure rate to 20 or 30% and accelerate still further? Wouldn't that be even better? That's what I think we can do. So there are actually a few limitations. Because of time, I'm going to skip a number of them. I think these are two pretty important ones I want to just mention on. First, it's really limiting creativity because customer needs remain unknown or misunderstood. So if innovation, going back to my definition, if innovation is the process of discovering customers' needs first and then developing solutions to address them, the basic building blocks for creativity are knowing all of the customer's needs, right? That's what we have on the left, all of the needs. And you need to know all the prospective solutions. And the creativity comes into play in making connections. Creativity is knowing, okay, here's a great solution for an unmet need. That's where creativity comes in. So companies are looking for, okay, we have these new capabilities, let's address all these different needs that we're aware of, but if there is an unknown need, no amount of creativity is going to help you. If it's a misunderstood, no amount of creativity is going to help you. Doesn't matter if you do left or right brain exercises or open innovation. If you haven't clarified what that unmet customer need is, you're not going to be able to get to it. So it limits the creativity in that sense. Also, it limits learning. Despite the idea and the emphasis on validated learning, it actually limits learning because it's conflating or mixing two experiments. So look at it this way. You have one experiment testing the customer need. You're launching your MVP, trying to get feedback. Is this MVP hitting the need we think it is? And the other is testing the efficacy of the solution. Those are two separate experiments. And what you're doing is confounding the results. You're mixing up and confusing the results. And it makes the learning invalid. So for an example, if you launch your MVP and you don't get the results from the customer that you expected, what's your takeaway? Just based on that. Now, you can always go out and talk to them, but based on that, you're going to have difficulty knowing, was it because I didn't understand my customer's needs? Or is it because my solution actually worked very well on something they don't care about? The solution was good, but it's not clear, was the solution bad or was my customer understanding bad? That's where the confounding comes in. I think it's helpful to think of science because one of the things that Lean Startup professes to do, and they are in their way, bringing science to the art of entrepreneurship and innovation, and there's a lot to that. However, think about good science, where we think we identify the problem before we start hypothesizing about solutions. So if you look, I'm making the comparison to customer space and solution space, because that's what Lean Startup's doing. So really, if you think about science, though, for a minute, defining the problem is the first order of business. And then you go into developing a hypothesis, making predictions, designing, conducting experiments, make observations, create or modify the theory. That's the scientific method. But a pharmaceutical company that understands that plaque is creating heart disease and strokes and peripheral vascular disease, they know that plaque is clogging the arteries. Then, once they've identified that problem, they can experiment with different formulas that will break up that plaque and hopefully reduce the incidence of those diseases. That's how they do it. That's what the good science is. Not trying to put together a formula and say, let's just have some people take this and see if we can figure out there are any improvements anywhere. So it's just not nearly as effective. It's trial and error. And so solution space is over there. Einstein understood this very well. I don't know, maybe some of you have seen this quote. If I only had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and only 5 minutes finding the solution. Now that may seem a little extreme, but what he understood that I think we often forget is that the quality of our solutions, their efficacy, is directly related to how well we define the problem. And there's an old saying, an old adage that a problem well defined is half solved. Anybody heard that? Yes, and I like to think of a corollary for innovation. A customer need well defined is half satisfied. Same sort of thing is going on. Now, Edison, people often in the lean startup camp often use Edison to make their case that they need to iterate. That's what Edison was doing, right? The quote, "I have not failed, I found 10,000 ways it didn't work." Actually, that's a misappropriation of that quote. He was always experimenting in the solution space after discovering what the customer's need was. There's stories about this. It's written up in a number of books, including Sarah Miller Caldicott's Innovate Like Edison. She's the great-grandniece of Edison's, has studied this. So there's some famous stories about how he learned early in his career never to make that mistake again. So we always would validate the customer need first and then get into the experiments in that solution space. Very important distinction. There's some other analogies if we look around. Medicine is a great one. Customers diagnose the patient's problem before and actually as a way to develop the treatment plan, right? A lot of people would consider it malpractice for a doctor to prescribe a treatment plan without doing a diagnosis. And yet, as Clayton Christensen has said, many companies are committing marketing malpractice by launching these prototypes and these offerings to people without fully understanding what the needs are. When you think about sharpshooters, there's a very specific process they go through to consistently hit the bullseye. Ready, take aim, and then fire, right? They don't say, get ready, fire, and then ask, did we hit anything? It just doesn't work very well. Also, those of you my age, maybe some of the younger guys remember or know this book. It's a great book. It's sold like 25 million copies, still a bestseller. And Covey talks about the second habit of highly effective people is keeping the end in mind. This is for personal productivity, for projects. It's certainly a critical skill for project management. And it's really no different for innovation. Except for innovation, I like to say, the first habit of highly effective innovators is to discover the target customer's end in mind and help them achieve it better than the competition. So those customers have something they're trying to accomplish, and it's our job to figure out what are they trying to accomplish, and just like a good project, what are their criteria for success? How will they know they have been successful with our offering? The real problem in all of this is the misbelief that customers cannot tell us what they want. This is something that has been bandied around so frequently, most people don't even challenge it or think about it. Matter of fact, there are quotes, I'll show one, to justify this point of view that are just not accurate. Just to validate what I'm talking about, in Eric Ries's book, he said, in entrepreneurship, we're working on products where nobody knows what the customer wants. At best, we have a theory, a hypothesis, a plan, and a hope. And that's why lean startup and design thinking, and I'm going to talk less about design thinking, and again, I have great respect for design thinking. It's changed innovation in many ways, and it also is based on the same problem, the same misbelief. I'll touch on that in a minute. Well, I guess the minute is here. Here it is. They do it through empathy, insight, and observation, and that's been much better than what used to be done. It just put a lot more emphasis on the customer at the center of design, human-centered design. So there's been a lot of success with IDEO, if you've heard of them. They're the biggest, I think, design and innovation consulting firm, and they've done a lot of great work. So again, I'm not trying to take anything away from them. But Tom Brown, in his book, Tom Brown's the CEO of IDEO, and he wrote a book a few years ago called Change by Design, about how IDEO and design thinking is transforming innovation in corporate America. And he talks about this quote from Henry Ford that I'm sure many of you have heard, to basically make the case that customers don't know what they want. So has anybody heard that quote before? This quote that if I'd asked customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse? Yes. And isn't it usually said as part of the justification that don't even bother asking customers because you're going to get a bunch of hooey, right? Well, the problem is it's the wrong question. If you ask people what do they want, it takes them into solution space. they're going to start thinking you're asking for, and we naturally think about, features and solutions. And they're not qualified to talk about that any more than patients are qualified to talk about their treatment plan. That's not their area of expertise. But they can tell us what they want to accomplish. So the question really should be, what do you want to get done? Or what do you want to accomplish using a horse? Now think about that for a minute. Had Ford asked his customers that question, what do you want to accomplish with a horse, using a horse, he would have readily found out. They want to plow fields. They want to enjoy outdoor recreation with friends and family, as well as travel from point A to B. Ship freight. There are all these different things, tasks to be done the customer is trying to do with that solution. And it opens up now a whole opportunity for innovation because we're not tied to current solutions. We're not constrained by current solutions. So, okay, if the key to success is understanding customers' needs, what is a customer need? And I think going back to this quote from Theodore Levitt, 1960, he said this, and it's still something that we lose sight of. He said, people don't want to buy a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. And the reason this is so important and profound, in my opinion, is because he's making it very obvious for us that needs are separate and distinct from solutions. So a drill, a punch, a pick, a laser, some yet to be invented tool, those are all a separate solution set from the need to make a quarter-inch hole. The reason that the misbelief that customers can't tell us what they want continues is because people are mixing up drills and holes. They're not getting clear what is a pure customer need. So we can extend this thinking into our own companies. So for example, just to see how Salesforce did this, they understand that people don't want to buy relationship management software. They actually have the no software logo as part of their logo. They really want to develop personal, productive, professional relationships. They understand that. Nike is great at this. They understand that people don't want to buy athletic shoes and apparel. They want to become better athletes and feel like one. NetJet, CEOs don't want to buy fractional jet ownership. They want to maintain their productivity while traveling and reduce wear and tear. So you can apply this to your own company, your own entrepreneurial startup. Needs are the functional, emotional, and social tasks that people want to accomplish. And I think it's helpful to think of them as being hired, whether they're hiring your service or they're buying a product, they're being hired to get a task done, just like a tool. They're picking your product or service, your solution, just like a hammer out of that toolbox. So the way to drive growth is to forget about solutions because we haven't defined where the important unsatisfied needs are yet. And instead think about how can we help customers get a task done better or get more tasks done. So I want to offer an opportunity for you to do this quickly with a person next to you, just the two of you, and identify the task that your customers are trying to get done. Okay, so this will be a minute each when I say go. And there are some sentences here I'm asking you to complete. To keep it real easy, all I have to do is finish these sentences. So for an example, Herman Miller, the furniture company, they understand that nurses in an acute care setting don't want to buy furniture, modules, and equipment. They want to get all the tasks done that are part of their job. So to help Herman Miller design furniture, we went out and figured out what a nurse is trying to accomplish. So for example, the functional job might be nurses want to collaborate with physicians to create a treatment plan for a new patient. That's a functional task. They want to feel respected and they want to be perceived as professionals. So those are some of the findings from that project. So, and I skipped over the first one, which is your own product and service. So please do that first. Our customers don't want to buy, what's your drill, if you will? What's your product and service? So please take a minute with somebody next to you, and I'll come back and break it up in 2 minutes. Okay. Thank you. Just please remember that the customer should be the one that's validating that information, right? It's great for us to get an idea of what they're trying to accomplish. That's really important, but there's no replacement for having the customer actually validate it or speak it themselves. So, okay, that brings us to the pivot. The pivot. Start in customer space and identify unmet needs. So there are 5 steps here. Who is the customer? There are a number of different things you can ask yourself, and it's not always clear. In a big corporate environment, there may be multiple customers that you need to talk to, all whose criteria for success you need to get clear and hit if you're going to be successful. So it's important to ask who is the most important and other influential customers. For whom do you want to create value? Who is ultimately responsible for results? Who has the most authority to evaluate quality of your offering? If there's a problem, who has to fix it? And who stands to lose the most financially if there's a problem? These are some simple ways to get a handle on who's the most important customer. Who's going to pay for your services? Now, what's the task? I mean, these are not a linear process. You may be aware that people are having trouble getting something done and have to go back into who are these people. That's fine. I think that's a great definition of a market. Forget about defining the market by product. A better way for innovation is the people who are a group of people that are trying to get something done and they struggle to get it done, and you have a way to help them get it done better. That's a much better definition of a market. So this isn't a linear process, 1, 2, 3. But we need to clarify not only who, but what are they trying to accomplish that you're going to help them get done better. Or perhaps it's a lot of different things. If you're in a professional association, you may want to help your target group do all kinds of things better. That's what professional associations do for accountants, for doctors, for whatever. So here, we just went through the drill. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but here are the 3 things you want to be considering. And ideally, with some help, and you can certainly try yourself, get these from the customer. This is not something I'm encouraging you to speculate about, but just to get the thinking clear. And what criteria? I was mentioning, just like a project that you're doing, you want to get clear what the end in mind is, and what are the criteria for success. So some questions you can also identify, some questions you can have them answer. What are their metrics for success in getting this task done? How will they know that they're going to be successful? How will other people in their firm know? How will their boss or their employees, their customers know? How are conditions going to be different or improved because of what you're trying to do? And where do they struggle? This is a really important one because a big part of the failure of startups and launching new products on innovation teams is shooting for unimportant needs or for needs that are already well satisfied. Now, there are different ways to get at this. We don't have time to go into questioning techniques to get at this. One of the best ways that you can do this is with a survey. So we take the tasks captured from interviews of the customer, put them into a quantitative survey to get customers a statistically representative sample, if necessary, to rate how important the task is and how well satisfied the task is. So this 2x2 is a very important output of this kind of upfront work we're doing. We're still in the customer space. We're not even thinking about solutions yet. But we want to get clear. If we can plot those tasks that we've captured on this 2x2, either as highly important, low important, highly satisfied, low satisfied, these 3 quadrants that are dark are all a waste of your limited resources if you try to target those needs. If it's unimportant, why bother? If there are other highly important things that are going unmet, right? If it's unimportant and you're over-serving it, it's an indication you can take some of the cost out. You can actually reduce some of the complexity and make it a more attractive offering. So that's probably an over-served area where you can take out some cost. And if it's already well satisfied, even though it's highly important, you're not going to get any differentiation trying to increase the satisfaction further. Think of it as just having a great meal at one of Cameron Mitchell's fine restaurants, and you are stuffed. You just had some wonderful German chocolate cake, and then they come up to you and ask if you'd like this apple pie. They want to give you the best, and they're trying to satisfy. obviously it's not going to do very much. You're already satiated. So that's with the top right quadrant. Now you may have to learn, if you're not in that, if the competitors, you can break out the data, look at the total market versus different competitors. There's a lot of great things you can do. But it may mean you have to, if it's important and other people are doing it, it may be a competitive disadvantage if you don't do it. So it's a must-meet need. But the key thing, really the bottom line is, find the important unsatisfied, that area, the golden area, because that's where the opportunities is. The more important and the less satisfied that task is, the greater the opportunity for innovation and growth, right? So that's the key, those are the key few. Better to go for those than waste your time with a lot of other needs that if you were doing lean startup, you'd end up very likely pursuing. And then lastly, here on the customer side is where can we win? Great strategy is formulated when there's a big market opportunity, a big customer need matched with your unique capabilities. And that's what we want to do here. So we've just gone through identifying the customer's tasks and needs, prioritizing them. Now we want to select which of those top opportunities are really great opportunities for us, for you, given your unique strategy, mission. There are about 6 or 7 pretty common criteria, and you can make, there's usually one that's a pretty unique thing too when I go through this drill with clients. But that now we have a subset of the opportunities we discover in the marketplace that are really great for us to address. That's the list we want to go into ideation. But the pivot here is to do all of that up front before we even think about solutions and make it into a 2-step process. So complete this in the customer space, and when that's done, then move into the solution space. Now you have some really rich information to focus your creativity, your capabilities, your team, yourself on those known needs where you have capabilities, you have a relative advantage to win. So you're way ahead in terms of iterating. You're way ahead. You don't have to worry about addressing a compelling unmet need. Now you can go through that. Executing innovation in this 2-step process really accelerates and improves the success rate in the validated learning. So the 2-step process saves time, resources, by focusing on creativity and capabilities that are in a known need in the marketplace. Systematically establishes competitive position that is valued and unique. Now that might not be obvious, but if you have gone through the effort to clarify, particularly with the survey, so you have great confidence, this is known to be an important unsatisfied need, and you're addressing it. If you are effective at addressing it, you're going to be creating something that is valued because they said this need is important to get done, and it's going to be unique because we know nobody else is doing it. That's why it came in as an important unsatisfied need. So it's a way to engineer a valued, unique position in the marketplace. Pretty powerful thing to do. And it creates a tight fit. We talked about this earlier. The way to create a tight fit, instead of launching, refining, is to find out what are all the things that I need to do and then do them, just like the doctor with the treatment plan, just like the sharpshooter with the target. This is what increases success rates dramatically. And one of the things that I didn't realize when I first started getting into this in 2006 at Stratagen, one of the wonderful things that's sort of a serendipity, and I guess it's intuitively obvious on one level, is that if you have clarity about the customer's important needs as well as those that are unsatisfied, everything that you're doing in your company, all those downstream marketing facing, customer facing, value creation activities like competitive analysis, generating ideas, messaging and positioning, all of that's going to be vastly improved because you have clarity about here's what they're trying to accomplish and where an important unsatisfied need is. For example, you can help your salespeople go out and ask questions because let's say 60% of this market, these people with this task that you're addressing, 60% of them, let's say you've gone through this drill and you know this, 60% of them consider this a very important unsatisfied need. you can ask the question to validate that, rather than asking a whole bunch of things like what's important to you, which there are a lot of good questions you can ask in sales. But now you can go right to the heart of what makes you different and where you think and know they have an important unsatisfied need. So you can improve every one of these customer-facing activities. So a couple of examples, NetJets, the tasks that senior executives want to get done is the focus. A lot of people may not realize, but NetJets was focused on the lifestyle, high net worth client for a long time, but saw an opportunity to get into corporate flight departments. So there are probably about 500 and some corporate jets that executives are using for business travel. A very natural adjacent marketplace that they had not been in. But it's, until you know what those tasks are, it's very difficult to enter in that, particularly when you have important customers like that. I mean, in lean startup, if you're in a digital environment and the economy is very different and the consequences of failure are very different, right? So to be a good consumer of any of this management theory, and that's really what we're talking about, is being consumers of design thinking, tasks to be done, or whatever, we need to understand the circumstances that we each sit in to choose which is really appropriate for our situation. So the opportunities revealed, some of them were maintain productivity while traveling. That's pretty obvious, perhaps. Avoid security hassles of commercial flights. To control the agenda. I know when I was doing some of those interviews that the ability to go to Chicago or LA and then change the agenda and do a different stop because of some text or some problem at a plant in the South before coming back to Columbus, that's a big deal for that, to keep productive. To reduce the wear and tear on people. I know that many of these executives, it's funny because I did those interviews not too long after the GM executives flew down to Washington and got a whole bunch of grief for it because they were being bailed out. You may remember that in the news. Real bad optics. And everybody's talking about the 1%, and Obama was really hammering on the 1% and private jets. And I'll tell you what, though, I really came away from talking to a bunch of them with a lot of empathy. They wanted nothing to do with being 1%ers. They had a job to do, and it was an extremely hard job. And it was not uncommon for me to hear things like, I could never have a life, get home and tuck my kids in at night if this jet weren't there to help me. I can stay productive. I am not exhausted. There's no way in the world you can do this job without it. So I saw a very different human side of things talking to them. And the results, this is Jeff, my friend and colleague here, said this, just to back up that this works. He's done this as in other client relationships and worked with me. He knows this process quite well. Another client, the National Fire Protection Association, this is an association, and they recognize that their customers are not interested in buying codes and standards. That's the drill, right? They sell a lot of codes and standards for what are called not just fire systems, but life safety systems for buildings. But they recognize that people, particularly designers who design the systems, those are architects and engineers, design these life systems for buildings, and installers, they're the contractors that get contracted to put them in, and inspectors. Of course, every municipality has to have an inspector to come in after a building is built and make sure that everything is built to code. So they're trying to get those things done. And obtain the documents needed to install the codes and standards, determine the intent of this system design, gain agreement with the local inspector on the design. These are the types of things that you can uncover when you're talking to the customer about what they're trying to accomplish with the product. That's the key thing. So here's another thing about Lean Startup. It's not bad to talk to customers with a prototype per se. It's a matter of what information are you seeking when you talk to customers. So if you're asking them, what are you trying to get done with this? I mean, you bought this thing, I consider MVP. That's a great question. What are you trying to get done with it? That's what Henry Ford should have asked. But because they don't know the difference, they're still confused about the drill and the holes. They're asking things like, how can we improve it? What features would you add? Did you like this feature? That's the wrong conversation. They haven't clarified the unmet need yet, and they're talking about the solution. So I have no problem using something to generate the discussion, but bring it back. The question should always be, since we're looking to get the criteria that customers use to measure success with your offering. The question should always be, when they offer a feature, which they will, or a product that they think would be helpful, the question should always be, why is that important to you? What will that enable you to accomplish? That brings it back to the customer space. And until you've nailed that, you're really getting ahead of yourself with solution conversation. So some results there. And boy, right on time. 10 minutes for Q&A. So we probably have a lot of experienced practitioners. Any thoughts, comments, questions? Boy, I left you speechless. Yes. Yes, sir.
I have one comment. Kind of it's an actual experience, but
A little louder, Bob, please.
about finding out what people want. I have a distant relative about 15, 20 years ago. Him and his dad were in business, and the thing fell apart. So he took his money. Didn't know what he was about 25 at the time. Didn't know what he was going to do. Took his money, put his clothes in his pickup truck, and went down south and all the way across the United States. Went to literally 300 different companies. Went in and talked to the owner and the manager of the company and said, if you were going to go in business today, what would you do? And he literally went to 300, but I talked to some dev about it. And when he got down, he found out, this is 20 years ago, he found out that they said, overwhelmingly, they said you would go into recycling plastic materials. And he has built a multi-million-dollar business right outside Chicago doing that.
Very
so
cool.
It's asking enough questions.
Ask
the right
questions.
Kind of questions.
So if you didn't hear that in the back, which I suspect you did, he had, was it a relative?
Yes.
Who asked 300 business owners all around the U.S., basically, what business would they go into when this guy was a young man. And he got feedback from a large number of them, recycling plastics, and now he's a multimillionaire having asked a lot of questions, I think was the thing you were picking up on there, wasn't it? Yeah, very good. Yes, Jonathan.
Do you think there's a technique to answer better questions so that you can get a sharper sense of what the real problem is?
Is there a technique to ask better questions to get?
To get a sharper feel on what the real problem is.
Oh, absolutely. That's a very significant skill. That's really what I do.
So Jonathan was your plan.
Yeah.
There was one, and we found it. There he is. Yeah.
At the same time, I mean, like in the spirit of lean startup, we're all in process, and I mean, getting some input, asking some questions with clarity that what you want to understand is what they're trying to accomplish and how they measure success will get you a very long way. I mean, just having that clarity that that's the objective, not to come up with a prototype until you have some clarity and confirmation, will take you a long way. Anybody else?
Can I ask one?
Yes.
I'm curious if anybody who did the exercise would be interested in sharing it with the room, and maybe you could give some reaction to it. How about that?
That's a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody like to do that?
Some volunteers?
I suspect that Lori.
Don't
might
be bashful.
interested. Lori's interested. Yeah.
Right, because
Yep.
I tripped up with this.
Okay.
So
Can you put that?
Yeah.
I'm
Hold
realizing.
on one second.
Okay.
We'll put the slide back. There we go.
I had a barrier with dealing, selling to people who are very, who watch the metrics real fast, because part of what I'm selling is a feeling of confidence, feeling of confidence, less anxiety, more trust. And I'm seeing with talking with Neil how I have to get my wording much sharper around the tasks and the more tangible outcome, especially as I was trying to see how to show my service is so valuable, or see if my service is valuable.
Okay, having said all that, you want to take a crack at the exercise?
Run through those.
Okay.
Okay, do it again. Okay, you'll do even better than you
No,
did
you
last
know
time.
what?
Yep.
I would like to think this through a little bit.
Okay.
And also, I've been a product of design theory and fail fast. So
Yes.
you're showing me, look at it from a different angle.
Yeah.
Too. I mean, it's worked for me, so maybe that's what I want
Yeah.
to stay with. But it hasn't worked with certain
Well,
groups I'd like to reach.
May I
So-
make a comment? And
Please.
it's just a larger comment, then we can come back if there's more with some of the specific things that you're talking about. But failing faster, I ran over that actually. That was going to be something. That's a big part of lean and design thinking and prototyping. And just to make it clear, if you looked at how I was saying the pivot is separating innovation into 2 steps. Do these 5 things in the customer space and then get into prototyping. So it's once you're in, you've got clarity about, just like the pharmaceutical company, once you're clear about the need, now doing fast failing is great. But to think that you can mix the 2 experiments and fail faster, I think is actually, just like I said up front, convoluting and confusing the whole issue. So the fail fasting is terrific in solution space once you have the customer need nailed.
Right, and I don't know if it even applies to things like manufacturing and service oriented. In my business, I don't have a lot of overhead. I don't have resource. I don't have capital in it. Whereas if you have capital, failing fast may be deadly unless you're
Yeah.
talking about your approach.
Yes,
So thank you very much.
thank you. Yes, sir. You want to give it a try?
You want a guinea pig?
Yes, thank you.
Our customers don't want to buy insurance products or investments. They want to retire. And they want to avoid feeling stressed. And they want to be perceived as successful.
Excellent. Did everybody hear that in the back? Yeah, that was a good one. Thank you. Do you have one too, Deirdre?
Yeah, we're developing a website with condo rentals for vacation and with some certification that they're good. So our customers don't want a website. They want an awesome vacation that they can look forward to, not worry about what it's going to be like, have memories after the fact, and be perceived as successful.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yes, sir. Yes, Ron.
From the perspective of the customer, as me speaking for Karen, our customers don't want to buy hearing devices. They want to be able to hear better and feel normal and be perceived as included in the community.
Beautiful example. Wow. Yeah, nailed that one. Good.
So now they can scale.
Yes, sir.
So I work in healthcare, and I'm wondering, in a situation where there are so many players, with all of them having different needs, and all those needs being important, how do you address all those needs? How do you understand them all and turn that into a solution?
Oh, that is a great question. It's actually a lot easier than it sounds. There is a lot of complexity, but this process works very well to simplify. If you look at each person, so I think of hospitals, they're nurses or they're doctors, nurses, other employees, patients, and administration. They all have different things they're trying to accomplish. If you look at patient experience, the way that you can handle that and really make it work and give an experience that they love is to uncover all the things that they have to go through or the tasks they have to accomplish from the beginning, that is when they perhaps realize they have an illness, depending on how far back you want to go. And they have to choose where to go, what kind of practitioner, what kind of medical help to seek, all the way through the process of getting to the office, getting treatment, perhaps having rehab, whatever it is that they're doing. But you can document that customer journey, that patient journey, in the exact same way, through the steps and the criteria for success at each step. And then you can put it through the quantitative thing, the quantitative survey, so you know, okay, at this step, here are 2 really important unsatisfied needs, the way we're doing it. And so you have a map, if you will, of the entire experience with precision about where the opportunities for improvement are. So it's not guessing. This is one of the things that is so much more powerful. I didn't talk about it because of time, but we can talk about it right now. I'll just mention one of the key differences between what I'm saying you can do here, what this approach does versus lean startup and design thinking is we quantify the importance and satisfaction so that there's some rigorous prioritization. It's not just left up to the researcher saying, well, I heard a lot of emotion on this, or it seems to me, after talking to a dozen, 2 dozen people, this was the thing that was most important. Now that's better than not talking to them. Again, I don't want to be dismissive. That's a lot better than not going out and talking to people. But if you have 100 or hundreds, like in a patient experience, of needs, discrete things they're trying to accomplish or feel or be perceived through that experience of being hospitalized, you need some other way to prioritize and understand where are we falling down. And so it's a great methodology to simplify that pretty complex environment.
How would you deal with the added needs of payers, government, regulation?
Well, I think thinking of them as different stakeholders, different audiences, and figuring out in your area what are they trying to accomplish with your hospital, your healthcare system, if that's what I hear. I think that's what you're talking about. So again, there are going to be different stakeholders that have different things, and getting clear what you have to do to deliver success for them is the same approach works regardless of who the audience is. It can be, the other cool thing is it can be internal. I mean, can you imagine how effective internal operations would be if internal people were taught how to talk to their internal customer and find out, what are you trying to get done with my output? That would be a really powerful productivity enhancer for the operations of any organization. To figure out, okay, you're trying to get this done and this done and this done. I didn't realize that. How's the output working for you now? Not very well. Okay. That it would help you to collaborate and co-create very effectively.
Keep going.
Any other questions, thoughts? Yes, sir.
I had a thought. Somebody asked about how do you ask questions. I know you got to be real careful at asking questions if you have a product in mind.
Yes.
That you're asking legitimate questions and not steering it to.
Yes. So let me bring that up for everybody. He was saying how important it is to be careful, and I would say the best thing is not even to mention solutions until after you've gone through the customer space, because of what's known as social bias. People tend to tell us what they think we want to hear or what is socially acceptable. So one of the beauties of keeping the two spaces separate, and actually there's a third separation now because it's relevant to what you're saying. We're going to get to the importance and satisfaction scoring separated from the interviews. So the interview, when you talk to somebody, all you're trying to get is what they're trying to get done. You're not asking them to place any value on anything. You don't mention any solutions. You're trying to figure out, what are you trying to accomplish in this space? Perhaps with this, but you don't get into any kind of feedback on the solution. And you don't ask them to make any kind of value judgment because you're getting into social bias. If they do it alone in solitude at their PC, the likelihood is they're going to be much freer to say what's really important because nobody's looking over their shoulder. The social bias of what's socially acceptable is minimized. It's not going to disappear. People still respond based on how they want to perceive themselves. But at least it's going to be different, a lot less of an error in the results than it would be if you ask people for validation. That's one of the problems with market research and why a lot of people don't want to do market research, because it's typically been asking for better solutions, better features on the product, not what are you trying to accomplish. How would you know if you were successful? Yes, Jonathan.
Okay, this will be the last one, okay?
Okay.
We'll wrap it up. Yeah.
How do you have a client question show?
Sorry, is this a big machine?
How do you handle a client when the questions show that their current product or solution is actually leading them off the cliff? It's the wrong way to go.
How do you stop a company from going off a cliff with a bad solution?
Yeah, how do you handle a client where you're asking a bunch of questions and you can see that their current approach is actually leading them into a bad place, not a good place?
Yeah. Well, there are a number of things that are kind of buried in that. What I hear, the piece that I hear that I'll address, and you can tell me if there's more, is there's a lot of investment often in a certain worldview and a certain project. So one of the things that, like any consultants in the room know, it's very important to sort of contract with the client up front about what the results might mean. And it's very important to say, We're going to be going with the data because we're going to be doing a statistically valid sample of your target market. And we're going to know where the highly important specified needs are. It may actually invalidate what people think over here with this project. Are you okay with that? I mean, that's a good conversation. You need, what's that old adage that you and I have said many times? No involvement, no commitment, or
Right.
yeah.
Yep.
I mean, it's really important for people to get engaged early so they don't feel suddenly dismissed because the research doesn't validate what they've thought and maybe even championed for a couple of years. But one of the nice things, I'll just say real quick, is it takes the decisions about strategic priorities out of the politicking realm to a large degree because we're looking at some reliable data instead of who has the biggest voice, who has the biggest title, leading the projects. Make sense?
Okay, I'm going to
Okay.
take over from here. Let's give Urko a round of applause.